Halfway through the one-year war, the Zeon High Command began looking for a space-worthy replacement for their aging but still highly successful MS-06F Zaku II F-Type. But unlike the previous design competition between the Zaku, produced by Zeonic, and the Zudah, produced by ZMAT, this one would have a lot more twists and turns, which could be directly attributed to one single enemy machine, the RX-78-2 Gundam. This cemented Zeon's fears that the Federation would one day develop, and also mass-produce, their own mobile suits. The problem being that the Zaku wasn't made primarily for anti-mobile suit combat, but anti-ship combat instead. And another feature that the RX-78-2 possessed was miniaturized beam technology. So halfway through the arms race, the Zeon High Command also required their next generation space mobile suit to be capable of using beam weaponry. This then pretty much immediately killed off two candidates. Zeonic had first tried to enter the race with a direct descendant of the F-Type, the MS-06R2 Zaku II High Mobility Type R2. A Zaku that, true to its name, pushed the capabilities of the Zaku to the maximum. But unfortunately, it was expensive, difficult to pilot for rookie pilots, and they weren't able to successfully incorporate beam weapons into it. ZMAT, meanwhile, first proposed a space version of their successful MS-09 DOM, the MS-09R Rig DOM, which was then little more than the standard DOM, but outfitted with space parts. But perhaps it was exactly this simplicity that did the trick. The Rig DOM boasted heavy armor, heavy firepower, strong thrusters to offset all of that weight, and it was easy to mass produce. The only flaw that it had was that it wasn't able to natively support beam weapons. However, this actually kinda worked in its favor. The Zeon High Command had a preference for the Gelgoog from the get-go, so when Zeon began reverse engineering the Federation's beam technology, they immediately wanted it incorporated into the Gelgoog. The problem with this, though, was that this caused serious delays in the development of the Gelgoog, which would have meant that Zeon would potentially be without a new mobile suit on the front lines, while the Federation was pumping out their brand new mobile suits. So they needed a stopgap right then and there, leading to a race between the higher performance but also more expensive and difficult to pilot Zaku II High Mobility Type R2 and the slightly lower performance but cheaper and easier to pilot Rig DOM. The Rig DOM won and would be mass-produced until mass production of the beam weapon-capable Gelgoog could get underway. But depending on the sources, there was also a fourth contender, the YMS-15 Gyan. Some older sources list this as a custom unit designed specifically for Mikuve, with even some voice lines from the anime supporting this.
しかし、マクベ大佐自らお出になることはないと。
あるのだな。ギャンは私用に開発していただいたモビルスーツだ。キシリや少々へ男としてのメンツがある。
But more modern sources lean towards the Gyan being a prototype that was entered into the race to become Zeon's next generation mass production mobile suit by ZMAT. And Mikuve just happened to really like it. So that's the assumption that we'll be going with in this video. Presented to you by NordVPN, the premier VPN service that not only allows you to dodge those pesky region locks, but also gives you extra protection while browsing at great speed. And by using the link down below, or the code kkrt, you'll not just get a sweet discount, but you'll also be supporting the channel. So, as you can probably tell by looks alone, the Gyan's main focus was close combat. With the Federation's first mobile suits hitting the battlefield, Zeon realized that the time was now for mobile suits with effective anti-mobile suit capabilities. And ZMAT, potentially with some influence from Mikuve, decided to make that the decisive characteristic of the Gyan. A powerful close combat mobile suit that could go up against the Federation's RX prototypes. Or, in other words, a Gundam killer. As such, everything about the design was made to accommodate the Gyan's main weapon, a powerful beam saber. Often cited as being Zeon's first ever beam saber, it was larger and also more powerful than its Federation counterparts. Also, it was designed more for stabbing than for slashing, although it was still very good at slashing as well. For the body then, the big thing that set it apart from previous mobile suits, and also its direct competition, was the Fluid Pulse Accelerator, a cylindrical device that was located on the Gyan's pelvis. The way Zeon's mobile suits move is by the main generator sending energy pulses to the fluid pulse motors located in each joint. The accelerator then acts as kind of a booster for the motors located in the legs, giving them better reaction speed and torque. And what this also did was enabling them to pull off the fencing style movements that we see Mikuve pulling off in the anime. Also, should the accelerator get damaged, be it by an enemy attack or by some kind of malfunction, it could also be immediately jettisoned. The head then also played an important role for the Fluid Pulse Accelerator. It was here that the interactions between it and the main generator were controlled. And it had some other cool features as well. Because the Gyan's focus was on close combat, it was well armored, and all of the important features were now located inside of the helmet. For example, it still has energy pipes and even an exhaust snout like the Zaku, but now all safely confined inside of the armor. What also got a big overhaul was the mono eye. Since it now had to deal with such a small slit in the armor, you would be forgiven for thinking that the Gyan's field of vision was inferior to that of the Zaku, but it was actually better. It was made by the same company who developed the Zaku's mono eye, but thanks to advancements in optics and software, its field of vision was larger. And on top of that, better and faster movement of the mono eye allowed for faster target acquisition. Another upgrade is something that it shares with the Gelgoog. The layout of its body was heavily influenced by the layout of the Federation's RX prototypes, and in fact, the layout of the Gyan's body was so similar to the layout of the Gelgoog's body that it was sometimes speculated that it was directly taken from the Gelgoog, or one of its earlier prototypes. And finally then, the arms were specifically fine-tuned for using the beam saber. Their reaction speed and power was upgraded to the max, surpassing that of any other mobile suit, including even the Gelgoog that it was competing with. The hands were set to be mostly the same as those of the Zaku 2 though, but with the wrist joints getting a wider range of movement. To wrap up the weapons then, it had a multifunctional missile shield, which in addition to functioning as a shield, could also be used to store the beam saber, it could act as a counterweight while using the beam saber, and it came with some built-in weapons. It held 25 hide bomb space mines and 60 needle missiles, which were small missiles that by themselves weren't very powerful, but could potentially damage exposed joints and were also very effective at distracting the enemy. As a result of these extra weapons though, the shield did have reduced defensive capabilities. In an attempt then to push the Gyan as Zeon's next generation mass production space mobile suit, Zemat really emphasized its ability to work together with the Rigdom, which at that point was being mass produced. The Rigdom with its heavy weapons could provide fire support, while the Gyan could move in for the kill with its powerful beam saber. But there were a number of problems. First and foremost, the Gyan didn't meet all of the requirements set out by the Zeon High Command. While its generator was powerful enough to support a beam saber, and a quite powerful one at that, it wasn't able to power a beam rifle. And its shortcomings didn't end there. Despite being excellent at close combat and having some very impressive technology in its limbs, its overall performance was inferior to that of the Gelgoog, including one of the most important things for a space mobile suit: its thrusters. The Gyan relied solely on the backpack for thrust, making it less maneuverable in space than the Gelgoog. And to further seal its fate, it was rumored that the Zeon High Command had set its sight on the Gelgoog from the get-go, and that allowing to compete to Gyan at all was nothing more than some window dressing. And to make matters even more complicated, the Gelgoog wasn't just a purely Zeonic mobile suit. They also got help from MIP, famous for their mobile armors, underwater mobile suits, and beam technology, and Zemat, who helped with the thrusters of the Gelgoog. So while the Gelgoog was pretty much the culmination of all of Zeon's know-how, combined with some stolen Federation know-how, the Gyan was just the Gyan, and I guess just there to make the Gelgoog look even better by comparison. Depending on the source, 1 or 3 units were produced, with one of the units being customized for Makuve's personal use. Unfortunately though, they never mention what these customizations were, so it's possible, for example, that the spike on the Gyan's head wasn't standard, and was instead carried over from Makuve's other personalized mobile suit, the Goof Makuve Custom. But despite not being adopted, the Gyan would receive somewhat of a favorable reputation. Makuve, who was not an experienced pilot at all, performed relatively well in his fight against the Federation's most fearsome ace, even receiving praise from the Red Comet himself.
ガンダムが型をつけてくれればありがたいとも思ったが、マクベめ、よくやる。
And it would also see some further development. Most famously, its characteristics would be combined with those of the Gelgoog to create Zeon's most powerful mass production suit ever, the Galbaldi. But for the development history of that machine, you can check out my dedicated video linked on screen and down below. Instead, let's have a look at the YMS-15E Gyan Eos, a machine that followed the theory that 3 Gyan prototypes were produced. 1 was assigned to Makuve, and 2 were assigned to Kycilia Zabi's mobile assault force. But rather than being used as is, these would be upgraded as a joint project between Zemat and Zeonic, with some input from Makuve himself. To give them better mobility in space, the backpack was replaced with that of a Gelgoog high mobility type, and it got new weapons in an attempt to make it more of an all-rounder machine. The shield no longer had any built-in weapons, but it was now much stronger, and it was even made out of new armor materials. And its main weapon was now a beam bayonet. Essentially, it was a beam lance with an underslung beam gun. The Gyan had finally gotten its ranged beam weapon, but it was weaker than the Gelgoog's beam rifle, and its effective firing range was also shorter. Plus, because the Gyan Eos was meant as both a combat unit and a ceremonial unit, the armor was overhauled to be more ornate, and it was given a striking red and white color scheme. The 2 units would be unveiled at the Zeon capital of Zoom City, and it was hoped that the Gyan Eos would see mass production. But just as the original Gyan, this would never come to be. They would be used in combat though, and they at least took part in the Battle of Abawaku, where they took down a Jim Sniper Custom. At least one of the 2 Gyan Eoses would then survive the war, and in UC 0090, it would be used by Uma Lightning for the Federation Survey Service. This unit was painted in blue, the Zeon emblem on the shield was replaced with a Federation Survey Service emblem, it got a giant bazooka, and it was retrofitted with a panoramic cockpit and a linear seat. Also, the name of the mobile suit was taken from the Greek goddess of dawn, which is why the Gyan Eos was sometimes nicknamed as the Knight of Dawn. But with the production of the Gyan prototypes, we didn't just get 3 completed units, we also got some spare parts. And according to the Blue Destiny manga, a set of these spare parts, which were meant for Makuve's unit, were instead captured by the Federation forces during the war. And they wasted no time trying to cobble them together under the leadership of Jigra. This new Gyan was a combination of Federation and Zeon technology, and also came with some very different equipment. It now had a more standard shield and a heat lance that could also be stored on the backskirt when not in use. There was only one small problem for the Federation though. Jigra was actually a Zeon spy, and when this restored Gyan was completed, she claimed it as her own. After this, the Gyan would go up in space, and it was upgraded with a bunch of verniers and extra thrusters, greatly enhancing its speed and agility in space. Also, because this unit is made out of spare parts, it is not officially counted as being part of the 3 completed Gyans, therefore not interfering with the previously established lore. And talking about Gyan spare parts, Gyan parts would also be used for the Zudah F. But if you want to learn more about that machine, you can check out my video on the Zudah's development history, which I'll also have linked down below. And we would see even more Gyans popping up after the 1-year war in various manga, video games, or even both, with some of them being more plausible than others. For example, the MS-15PLUS Gyan EX, a souped-up Gyan that was built by Axis and used by Char in UC 0083. This machine was designed to be used around Jupiter, and in addition to using the Gyan standard issue missile shield, it now also got a beam rifle, meaning that its generator was now powerful enough to completely support beam weapons. It appeared in Kazuhisa Kondo's Operation Titan manga. Next up, we have the MS-15K Gyan Custom, or Gyan Kai. But regardless of how you want to pronounce it, this was an advanced version of the Gyan built by Axis for yet another internal arms race. This time, the Gyan would be competing against the Bau, and things were actually looking really good at first. Its maneuverability was excellent, and its overall performance was deemed to be superior to other Axis mobile suits, for example the Zusa, the Gallus J, and even its direct competitor, the Bau. But its main drawbacks remained the same. Just like the original Gyan, it focused only on close-range combat. In its shield, it had a bunch of needle missiles, and that was it for long-range combat. Instead, its main weapon was a large beam sword that was significantly more powerful than the beam sword used by the original Gyan, and as a result, almost every other beam saber at the time. This lack of flexibility would again be the Gyan's undoing, and plans to mass-produce the Gyan Custom were dropped. However, it was set to form the basis for the later R. Jarja, and it would also make an appearance in the recent Gundam Werewolf manga. Much later then, we would encounter the OMS-15RF RF Gyan, built by Zeon, also known as the Oldsmobile Army. And as with all of their machines that resembled mobile suits from the old Principality of Zeon, they weren't so much developments from those machines as much as they were replicas built with state-of-the-art technology. And especially the RF Gyan was built with state-of-the-art technology, because it was meant to be used by high-ranking officers and ace pilots. As a result, this machine was expensive to produce and not seen as often as the other Oldsmobile mobile suits. For weapons, it kept the Gyan's signature large beam saber, but instead of a missile shield, it had a normal shield, and it also got a weapon from the Goof, the Heat Rod, which is also its only somewhat ranged weapon. And if I'm talking about the Heat Rod as a ranged weapon, you know how close-ranged focused this machine really was. Also, it had ornate markings on its armor to really drive home the point that this was a mobile suit for the elite of Mars Zeon. And that was it for the Gyan's development history. At least officially, because over the years, people have asked, what if the Gyan won against the Gelgoog? And for a long time, this question remained unanswered. But then one day, a game called Giran's Greed was made, a turn-based strategy game where you could make the decision to choose the Gyan over the Gelgoog. And the result was a Gyan variant for almost every 1-year war Gelgoog variant, starting with the YMS-15 Gyan, which now essentially became the MS-15S Gyan Commander type, a machine that was famously used by aces like Char Aznavour, Annabelle Gato, and Ramba Ral. And that last pilot might confuse some of you, because by the time that the Gelgoog was completed, Ramba had also completed his life. And well, that was because in Giran's Greed, you can also make decisions that save the lives of many famous characters who would otherwise die, including Ramba Ral and 3 guys that will become relevant in a second, the Black Tri-Stars. But before we can talk about them, we have to talk about the Gyan mass production version, also known as the A-Type. In the first Giran's Greed game, the only difference between the mass production version and the Commander version was the color. But in subsequent games, the antenna was made shorter to really signify that this was the mass production version, and its color got changed once again. The next 2 variants were more involved than their Gelgoog counterparts. For the Gelgoog high mobility type, the only thing that was changed was the backpack, but for the Gyan high mobility type, almost the entire mobile suit got overhauled. The armor is completely different, and even the weapons were upgraded. On each lower arm, it got a 4-barreled Vulcan gun, the beam sword was replaced with a beam lance, which was perfect for high-speed charging attacks, and the missile shield was replaced with a 4-tube rocket launcher shield, which then also significantly increased the mobile suit's long-range capabilities. And if need be, it could also be outfitted with a modified missile shield that only had needle missiles. And the most famous pilots of these machines were of course Johnny Ryden, Robert Gilliam, Gabby Hazard, Masaya Nakagawa, Elliot Rem, Shin Matsunaga, and the Black Tri-Stars. Again, you can make them survive in this game. And yes, that also means that if you choose to go with the Gelgoog, you can give them a Black Tri-Stars custom Gelgoog high mobility type. It even appears in one of the openings. But we're talking about the Gyans here, not the Gelgoogs. So on to the Gyan Cannon. And again, things were changed quite a bit more than with its Gelgoog equivalent, although not as much as with the Gyan high mobility type. The Gyan Cannon kept the standard issue beam saber, and even its armor remained largely the same. It just got some extra armor on the shoulders and on the front skirts. For extra weapons then, it got a 3-tube grenade launcher on each arm, a pair of conventional 180mm cannons on the backpack, and depending on the source, Vulcan guns in the head. Its most famous pilot was Thomas Kurtz, and despite being the equivalent of the Gelgoog cannon, it definitely takes some development cues from the Federation's gun cannon instead. Next up, we have the Gyan M, or the Gyan Marine type. This machine was a development of the mass production type, but it featured various upgrades to make it stronger and more maneuverable. For example, the armor was made lighter, and it got a backpack with stronger thrusters. And what that backpack also had was 3 mounting points for propellant tanks, to of course increase its operational time. In terms of weapons then, it got the same base loadout as the high mobility type. A beam lance and a 4-tube rocket shield, which could also be changed out with a machine cannon shield should the need arise. And for commanders, a pair of Vulcan guns was added to the head. And the most famous pilot of this commander type was of course Shima Garahao. And finally, the ultimate Gyan from this Giran's Greed alternate timeline was the Gyan Krieger. Its name comes from the German word for warrior, and it was a development from the high mobility type, making its setting a bit different from its Gelgoog equivalent, the Gelgoog Jaeger. But its armor got overhauled, it got even stronger thrusters, and its weapons were made to be even deadlier, thanks to a more powerful generator. Its new beam lance could take out a battleship in one single hit, and it got a new launcher shield that housed 2 beam cannons and 4 grenade launchers, making this thing extremely deadly at both close range and long range. Unfortunately though, we don't know of any ace pilots who used this machine. What is weird though is that despite the Gyan Krieger never existing in the mainline Universal Century, some of its parts do appear in a manga that is set in the mainline Universal Century. They're used as upgrade parts for the Lepus in Gundam Bandiera, So you can rationalize for yourself how they exist in the manga. Like, I like to think of them as pre-production test parts that needed to be used for something after the Gyan project got canned. Also, these parts were provided by Mikuve himself. But now back to our timeline where the Gyan was mass-produced. Outside of the Giran's Greed games, the Gundam Network Operation games also had the option to mass-produce the Gyan. And if you then also managed to prevent Dr. Clust Moses from defecting to the Federation, you could produce the Gyan exam equipment version. As the name indicates, this was a Gyan with the exam system installed, making it an extremely dangerous foe. Other than the exam system, it seems to have been mostly the same as the standard Gyan. And we're still not done because we also got some board game variants. First up, in Sieg Zeon, we got another mass-produced Gyan, the MS-15B Gyan mass production type, not to be confused with the MS-15B Gyan high mobility type. The big difference though is that the B-type mass production version is set in the mainline Universal Century. According to this setting, mass production of the Gyan already begun before the competition between the Gyan and the Gelgoog was officially decided. But by the time 10 of these mass production Gyans were produced, the Gelgoog emerged victorious, and the mass production plans were cut short. What is weird about this B-type mass production type Gyan though, is that it was equipped with a Gelgoog-style beam rifle, which was the one big problem with the prototype Gyan. So this thing kinda reminds me of the YMS-15 SS Gyan Susumu version from Build Fighters. And then in Mikuve's legacy, we got a mobile suit called the Karyovin. This wasn't necessarily a machine that was developed from the Gyan, but it was a machine purpose-built by Mikuve as a gift to Kycilia, so it no doubt inherited some of the spirit of the Gyan. It was a highly maneuverable close combat mobile suit that came packing with a missile launcher, a retractable beam spear, and smoke bombs. It was also described as Mikuve's treasure, and he supposedly modeled the mobile suit after Kycilia herself, so someone definitely had an obsession. Unfortunately for him though, due to circumstances, he would never get to give it, and the machine was hidden instead, alongside a bunch of biological and chemical weapons. Even in death, Mikuve's gonna Mikuve. And for completionist's sake, let's quickly go over the Thunderbolt and G-Quux versions of the Gyan as well. In Thunderbolt, the standard Gyan has only been slightly changed, at least by Thunderbolt standards. It got a Gelgoog-style backpack, the missile shield got redesigned and now fires missiles instead of hide bombs, and instead of its trademark beam sword, it got a very unique looking beam rifle. And later on, we're also introduced to the Gyan Boss Lorenzo custom. This Gyan looks a lot more like the mainline version and now uses a beam sword. Plus, it's got a banner hanging from its antenna. This thing is really going for the medieval vibes, and I'm loving it. In G-Quux then, we get one of the most radical redesigns of the Gyan yet, and for a lot of people, it seems to have been one of the best too. Its standard weapons consisted of 2 high-output beam sabers, a missile shield with 6 missile launchers, and a massive composite weapon system known as the Hakuji. Simply put, this was a giant lance with thrusters on one end for extra mobility and extra penetrating power, and a beam rifle on the other end for extra long-range capabilities. And unlike the mainline Gyan, these machines would see mass production and were assigned to Kycilia Zabi's armored assault force. And these machines would also perform surprisingly well, single-handedly wiping out a squadron of the National Defense Force's Big Zams. The most famous pilot of this Gyan was Xavier Olivetti, who got his own custom-colored unit. And here's a fun fact. Hakuji was actually meant to be the name of the original Gyan, but at some point this was changed. So it is cool to see this weapon referencing that name change. And that has been all for the development history of the Gyan. This time for real. And you know what? For a mobile suit that was supposedly scrapped after only 3 units had been produced, this has been a remarkably long history. After seeing the Gyan appearing in G-Quox, I thought why not make a quick video on the Gyan from the mainline Universal Century, because how long could it be? So yeah, let me know down below what your favorite version of the Gyan was, and whether you're on Team Gyan or Team Gelgook. Don't forget to check out NordVPN with the link down below, or the code kkrt. As always, a big thank you to the Patreon supporters. I hope everyone watching has a great day, and I'll see you all next time.